Well, welcome today to our session on Tableau Server security. Us two handsome devils on stage. We are myself, Kieran Flynn. I'm a product consultant I'm from Ireland, but I'm based in the London office in Europe. And I had the privilege to fly over here to meet all of you and to present for you and to enjoy the conference as well.
Yeah. And I'm Chris Wilkins. I'm a software engineer on the product security team at Tableau. I've actually had the chance to be here for many years and have contributed in a variety of roles. So anyway, we're really happy to be here and able to present to you.
Yeah, don't be shy. He's been at 9 Tableau conferences. I'm happy to have 3. He's been at 9. So he's the tenured one, okay? Okay, so before we jump into it, let's give you some context about who we are and what makes us who we are, I guess. So I'll start with myself. I am an avid soccer fan. I absolutely love soccer. I was going to say football, but you might get confused with the soccer ball, so it's all fine. I love Arsenal in the UK, my favorite team. I also love to travel. And when I can travel with work and merge those together, it's even better. Okay? So flying out here, even though it was a 9.5-hour flight to get here, I loved it. It was no problem. I was talking to a ton of Tableau customers on the flight. It was awesome. With those two things, I also have one more passion. I love cats. Okay? And I was so stoked to see the cat meme walkway. If you haven't seen it already, there's like cat memes everywhere. I was like, this is awesome. But I love cats so much that I've got lots of photos with cats, and my Instagram's covered in cats and whatever. Crazy cat man. I accidentally changed my photo on my corporate, Windows Active Directory page, and my corporate photo ended up being like this. I changed it on Yammer, I think, and it turned out to be this. And I just said, OK, I'm going to keep it. I'm going to own this. I've just become the crazy cat guy.
I don't think I can top that, but that's OK. Let's see. So I spend a lot of time with computers, both in and out of work. Fortunately, I get paid to do this. And the expression on this guy's face, at first I was like, oh. But actually, it is a little bit of a love-hate relationship at times. I'm sure that all of us have told our computer, please do what I want you to do, not what I told you to do. I also love bicycles. I spend a decent amount of time, and I actually built one from scratch for the first time. My wife was not thrilled about the fact that I did it in the living room, but that's OK. And I have a family, and I also spend a lot of time with them. And they were thrilled when I said that I'd put them on the slide in my talk. And so they each created a Bitmoji, and here we are. So 3 kids, wife.
The backstory on the Bitmoji, I created my Bitmoji and created his one. And he's like, what is this thing you created? And how could you create this character that looks so much like me? And then he went and built his whole family, or asked them to send him the Bitmojis. So
that went
cool.
well.
That went very well. OK, so again, we kind of mentioned a bit about who we are and why we're here. Chris is coming from the product side. So lots of things that we're going to discuss today. Chris was actually part of the team that implemented and created it. So I'm really excited. From preparing this session and working with Chris, I've learned a lot. And Chris will be able to share insights potentially during the presentation and afterwards if you have specific questions. He knows a ton of stuff. I mean, 9 years, guys, he knows a lot of stuff, right? I myself, I work with customers on a daily basis. So I listen to your feedback. I help you get enabled, up and running with the product. Anytime you tell me you expect some type of functionality to happen when you do something, I relay it to Chris. I say, Chris, you do this. Not directly, but Chris's team and the whole dev organization as a whole. We're both passionate about Tableau, obviously. We work for Tableau, and we love Tableau. But we realize that we have to take security seriously when we are deploying environments and having our users interact and work through the content. It has to be secure. And it's becoming more and more important as we move through data protection laws. Especially in Europe, we've got GDPR. And a lot of your organizations will probably have to adhere to these rules as well. All these data security questions just keep coming up, and they're not going to go away. OK, so I guess how to get the most out of this session for you today. The materials are available for you offline. So when we're finished the session, they'll be available for you to download. We've actually changed the mechanism by which we give the content to our team so that it's available. They actually bribed us by giving us free water bottles and T-shirts. So, I mean, it worked. They have all the content. It's all scrubbed. So it'll all be nice and readily available for you. We will ask that you hold your questions until the end. Sometimes the questions get out of control in the middle, and we're trying to rush, and we don't get what we want to say out. But we're happy to stay back and answer questions at the end. So hold on to those for the end. And just learn. Just try to pick up some new techniques, some new principles, and you should have a good session. OK. So this session is going to be really talking about lots of different topics. There are 3 main topics. I won't go into them just yet. But what I want from you today is to come away with a can-do attitude. So I've already spoken to a few of you in the room just before we got started. And it's about just knowing a bit more about the server. Maybe being a bit more confident to try something or go ahead and tell your system admins, we can do this, can we try this? So it's about coming away with something like that. It's about getting some inspiration. We might show you something during the demo at the end. You might go, OK, we can use that. I didn't know we could do that with Tableau. Let's implement it. And all of those things, or those 2 things together, combined into a call to action. So when you guys go back to the office, we want you to take some of these principles and apply them. So this is the whole point of the conference, getting confidence, getting inspiration, and then having a call to action and bringing it back to your organizations.
So the main point of this talk is to give you the tools and the knowledge, the concepts, so that you can have confidence that you're controlling who can see what in server and who can modify what. Okay? And so in order to accomplish that, there's probably 3 main things you have to pay attention to within Tableau Server. Okay? The first thing is authentication. How do you know that requests, who are they coming from? Okay? And so authentication is how server determines who a given user is. Okay? And there's a number of ways to do that, and we'll get into that. The next thing is authorization. So somebody wants to look at something, they want to edit something, they want to delete something. Are they allowed to do that to that particular piece of content? Okay? So authorization is how the server determines what a given user is allowed to do. And then the third is data security. So when you're dealing with sensitive data, valuable data, which many of you are, you want to have layers of protection in to ensure that only the people that are supposed to be able to see content can see that content. So we'll also talk about data security as its own topic. Okay?
Cool. OK, so as Chris mentioned, the first topic we're going to address is authentication. So that's really establishing who you are and do you have access to the server. So it's asserting your connection. You're coming to the server. Who are you? Can we connect you? And Tableau can do this in multiple different ways, multitude of different ways. We have our local authentication, which many of you might be using. And that is the default probably that we go to. But we do realize that there are organizations that are leveraging directory services like Active Directory or LDAP. And they're also possible here as well. So synchronizing with your Active Directory, taking your users periodically or updating your users periodically from your Active Directory, taking the groups, using them and leveraging them so that that is the point of change. As a user comes into your organization, they're going to be added to Active Directory. So you don't have to go and do it again in Tableau Server. They'll just be there and ready to go when they want to start using dashboards and visualizations. And we've recently released the LDAP option as well. So that's available too, where you can leverage your LDAP directories as well. We'll go into some detail about the different ways that you can connect to your LDAP directory, and we'll give you some best practices around that too. OK, so users that exist in Tableau Server, right? So this might be very basic for all of you, but we're just going to cover it from here and just kind of give you an idea. So we authenticate users through the web browser, Tableau Desktop, Tab Command, and APIs, all using the server. So all HTTP requests, they come through, and we assert, guess who they are for whatever they're going to do. So if it's just looking at it from a web browser, I'm a viewer, or Tableau Desktop, I'm a creator, or Tab Command, I'm writing some script to do an export or to send an email. That's all happening through the local authentication, in this case, on Tableau Server. Likewise with the APIs. OK, so populating your server with users can be achieved in a multitude of different ways. Obviously, the first one being your graphical user interface. We can just go in and we can add them in. And that's easy and fine when you've got 5 users, 10 users. That's really simple. But what if you get into a situation where you've got lots of users? We could potentially use tab command, so our command line interface tool, where we have a template file of CSV, basically, with lots of users there. And we can push that up to the server and have those servers created programmatically. A more robust and potentially more customizable option would be the REST API. So I worked with a customer recently where with the REST API, we wanted to add users. And every time we added a user, we wanted to add a group as well, or add them to a group and then create a project for them. So with the REST API, we wrote a quick Python script, iterated through it for all the users in a CSV or in a list, and then just pushed them to the server. Really, really simple, can be reused and leveraged again in the future. So REST API is really, really good. And don't be daunted by using the REST API. We're not going to get into it today, but it is actually quite straightforward. And there are lots of materials online to help you with that. The CSV that I mentioned for not only the tab command option, but also if you use the bulk add option in the GUI, must follow a certain structure. And it's going to look like this. The key things to point out are there is no header for the field names, so just exclude that. But the structure must be in this form. So we're going left to right here on the screenshot example, but it's the same top to down. So just follow that across. And if you maintain that, you're going to be fine. But any changes to that, there'll be a little bit of a confusion. OK, so we've talked about the local authentication, getting users into the system. Obviously, with Active Directory, we don't necessarily have to do that. We can just synchronize with the directory. And how that works is we have a user that we have existing. A user logs into Tableau Server. So we've added them already to Tableau Server. They exist in Tableau Server from their Active Directory alias. So when they go to log into Tableau Server, the credentials aren't actually held or verified on the Tableau side. We're not holding them. We're simply just passing them on to AD and asking AD, right, does this alias and this user's credential password match on your side? And AD says yes, that user exists, passes a token back to Tableau Server, and allows the content to be displayed to that end user. Cool. That's the end-to-end flow of a user trying to get content. But we need to make sure that that directory and the users on Tableau Server are constantly updated. So we have an Active Directory sync. And this is a very simple diagram, but just to go through it, it's syncing users and groups that exist on Active Directory. And then assigning roles as well. So inheriting roles as well from the groups. You can say you have access to this project, or you have row level security for this particular region, let's say. And you can do all of that there as well. OK. The LDAP identity store, again, not diving into detail, but if anybody is using LDAP, there's a certain different approaches when it comes to binding with the LDAP service. Okay? The first one is a simple bind. It's unencrypted. It's very easy to do considering the other options. But you just want to be careful and be aware that it's not the most secure option for you. The second option is over SSL. So you've got that encrypted connection where when you're actually, your details are in transit, they're all protected for you. And then there's the Kerberos binds, the option where you are using an existing token or key tab file that exists, potentially already exists, but we'd always recommend that you might create a new one for the Tableau service. So that if you ever need to just cut it off and say, no, we don't want the Tableau service to do this bind anymore, you just remove that key tab file. Okay? So some options there. Just wanted to gloss over them. There is other sessions that will go into more detail. There's a lot more information available online, but just know that it's there and be aware it's there. And I made this quick table because I delivered this session last year and had a number of different questions when it came to some of these other methods on the left-hand side. And I wanted just to create a mapping table to say whether it was possible with the local authentication or with Active Directory. And this could be useful. So I think based on someone's feedback last year, we just added this in as a quick reference. So you might be able to spot something you use or want to use on the left-hand side.
So another option is what's called single sign-on. Okay? And this is where you have your users signing in to a system over here, and it takes care of authenticating them using username and password, two-factor authentication, smart card, whatever it needs to be, whatever, okay? And so Tableau Server is not doing authentication. Tableau Server trusts this system over here to do authentication. And this is good for administrators because now you have fewer places where you have to maintain credentials. And it's also better for users because they may have to sign in fewer times, right? They can sign in here one time, and now they have access to various applications that all trust that single sign-on system. So Tableau Server supports a number of different single sign-on options. SAML is a very common one, okay? And Tableau supports it. We use it in Tableau Online. This is a very good option for many enterprises. We also have something called Trusted Authentication, which is something that Tableau implemented to support specific scenarios. And I know that there are some people in the audience who actually are using Trusted Authentication. It is good for certain scenarios, not all. And then there's a number of other things we support that also fall into the single sign-on bucket. Kerberos, OpenID, integrated Windows authentication, okay? And they all have pros and cons and particular constraints. So in this talk, we're going, okay, so SAML is supported by Tableau Online. OpenID is supported by Tableau Online with Google. Yeah. So in this talk, we're going to talk about SAML and trusted authentication. And we're going to talk about SAML because it's actually conceptually very similar to the other types of single sign-on, okay? And trusted authentication we're going to talk about because that's Tableau specific. So SAML, the way that SAML works is pretty straightforward, okay? You have a user, and they want to access some content or do something on Tableau Server. Okay? And so the first thing that their client will do is they'll go make a request of Tableau Server. And Tableau Server will say, I don't know who this person is. Okay? And so it will tell their browser, their client, so that could be desktop, it could be whatever it is, whatever, and it will say, hey, go talk to the identity provider. Okay, and so the client gets redirected to the identity provider. It sends a request there. And at this point, Tableau Server has no expectations of how that goes down. This could be 30 various steps through a website where you have to answer security questions about your first pet's name and whatever. Or it could be a security card, or it could be whatever. However that IDP authenticates the user, that's what happens. And in the end, once the user is authenticated by that identity provider, the identity provider provides what's called a SAML assertion. It's essentially like a signed note, okay? And the client then goes back, presents that SAML assertion to server, and Tableau Server says, oh, now I know who you are because I trust that IDP to tell me who you are, all right? So that's the flow. So the next thing is what's called trusted authentication. And so in this scenario, what we have is we have a web portal that has various content. And so a user is coming in and talking to that web portal. And in that web portal, there may be some Tableau visualizations that is content that should be shown to this user. Now, this user may or may not have an account on Tableau Server. They may not even know about Tableau Server, okay? And yet, that content is protected on Tableau Server. And so this user, in order to view it, has to view it as a particular user. So what happens is there's a trusted relationship that the administrator has set up between the web portal and Tableau Server. And so the web portal will go and talk to Tableau Server and get a token that is valid for a short amount of time. It will build a URL using that token, and then it'll give that URL back to the web browser as part of the page. And so then, when the browser goes to follows that URL so it can find the view, so present the view to the user. That user is actually authenticated into Tableau Server as the user that was specified when the web portal asked for the token. Okay, so this is a way to do custom integration with Tableau Server without exposing your users to the details of Tableau Server, without even having to maintain a separate user account for each user. Okay. Okay, so that's it for authentication today. Next, we're going to talk about authorization. And again, so authorization is how the server determines what actions a given user should be able to take for a given piece of content. So the first thing we need to talk about is we need to talk about users. Okay? So when you go and you create a user, you need to figure out what role they have. Okay? And so we have a variety of roles here. And going from least privileged to most privileged, it goes unlicensed, you can't do anything. Viewer, explorer, creator, and within those, you need to also pick what administration level somebody has, okay? And so for administration, we have server admin, as in you get to manage the whole server installation, or site admin, you get to administer a particular site, okay? And then there's also a separate decision for, are you a publisher or not? Are you able to publish content to the server? So when you create a user, you have to select one of these, and you need to understand the implications of each of these roles.
So this will be mirrored in the dialog box when you add a user. You'll have these options. And although we have our licensing role-based pricing model as creator, viewer, creator, explorer, viewer, you will be asked to choose one of these. So understanding which one you want and which one makes sense is kind of critical to this situation.
All right. So now you understand user roles. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the conceptual structure in Tableau Server. Okay, so first we're going to start with sites. So sites are something that we added years ago to enable us to ship Tableau Online. So Tableau Online is our SaaS product, and it is a Tableau Server installation that has many different sites, each of which appears to be its own server. Okay, so this is a multi-tenant implementation of Tableau Server. And if you're using on-premise Tableau Server, you can create multiple sites. Sites are intended to be a very hard separation. There should be no information leakage between sites. Okay? So if you're using sites, it's because you do not want to share any content, any data sources, any permissions, anything between various sites. So we do have customers who use this because they want to ensure that there's a hard separation. Sites they're the big hammer approach to ensuring that you don't have information leakage between different groups of people. Okay? They're very useful, but if you do want sharing, they can get in the way of that. Next, we have the concept of groups. And groups are a way to cluster users. Groups are going to be important to how you use permissions. They can make things much simpler for you. So users can be associated with one or more groups. And then next we have projects. And projects are a way to have collections of content. So content includes workbooks and data sources. Okay? And a workbook is a collection of views. So these are the nouns in our system, and you need to understand these things, okay? Because this is, in essence, how you're going to structure things such that it is easy to manage your server. Okay, you will sometimes see server installations where it's not structured well, and then it becomes a headache to manage.
Yeah, I've seen customer scenarios where they've got 15, 16 sites, you've got duplication of data sources, you don't have that single point of change anymore, so this can get out of control really quickly. As an admin of the server, you want to delegate as much as possible, but creating sites might not always be the best approach. So understanding that is key.
Mm-hmm. All right, so here's an example. So here's a server installation. It has two sites. There's an HR site and a sales team site, and each has its own projects and groups. and users within them. So this is an example where sites probably make sense. Like there is no use case in which you want the sales team getting into confidential HR information, right? So if you have sites, then you can have high confidence that users in the sales site do not have access to the HR site unless they've been explicitly added, okay? Yeah, so in this helps highlight who gets to control what. So in this installation, you have server admins. So server admins are in charge of creating sites. They're also in charge of creating who is a site admin, okay? Site admins are the ones who manage an individual site. They manage who the users are for that site, what the groups are, the projects, and the permissions. Okay? So if you're a server admin and your server installation has many sites, you really want site admins so you don't have to do everything. Okay? And then publishers are people who create content, and they get to, in some circumstances, manage the permissions for their content. Okay, and we're going to get into some best practices and discuss why I put sometimes there. All right, so this is the permissions dialog. I think, Kieran, you had some comments on this.
Yeah, I thought it was, we didn't have this included necessarily last year. So if you're new to governing and managing Tableau Server, this dialog interface might not be familiar to you. And a lot of my customers actually don't realize that you can expand the different project workbooks or data sources tab to expose the granular permissions that you can assign. So you can see just in this GIF that you can actually go in and override and select specific things. Instead of setting it at a role level, you can go in and change some things. So this is just worth including, and this will be available as well as part of that package for you afterwards. So just a quick GIF to highlight how that works. Yeah.
Okay. So permissions are how you grant access to content to users. Okay? But what we really want you to do is we actually want you to use projects. We want you to use permissions to grant access to projects to groups of users. Okay? So instead of thinking about individual users and individual content, think about groups and projects. And this will scale better for you, and it will help you reason through what is actually going on. Okay? So again, permissions are the way that you grant access to projects, which are collections of content, to groups, which are collections of users.
Yeah, and again, you'd be surprised how often I might see customer scenarios. Again, you're starting off, you've got 5, 10 users. It's very easy to assign permissions for that small number of users. And this kind of falls by the wayside. It gets missed. So just want to drive that home. Try to implement this from a group to project level, like Chris said.
All right. Okay, so access permissions. So this is going to talk about, given a set of permissions, how do we determine whether a user can see a particular piece of content? Okay. So first off, we say, has this user been denied access to this content? If they have, they don't get to see it, period. Doesn't matter what else is true, okay? And then next, has that user been specifically granted access? And if yes, they get to see it. We're not going to do any more checks. Okay, next, has any of the groups that they belong to been denied access? If yes, they don't get to do it. And has any group that they've been added to been allowed access? Yes, okay, then they get to see it. And if they haven't, then they're denied. So the default is they don't get to see it.
Yeah. And the main takeaway here is it's check user first, check denied first, then work your way through. This is something that I think a lot of people re-reference. I re-reference myself when I'm talking to customers just to ensure and check this. So this is really, really useful to know. One other thing just to point out, that this is access permissions. This is not for feature functionality. So things like web edit, for example, and we're going to go through some scenarios. That could potentially be blocked by the site role assigned to that user. Okay? So as you work through these scenarios coming up, you just bear that in mind. Okay? So site role also plays a part when it's feature function capabilities.
All right, so I said these things, but I'm going to say them again. So the best practices for permissions that we are suggesting. So number one, we haven't talked about. So there's something called the default project. So you go and you create a new site on your server, and there's a project there. It's called the default project. That project is used for two different things. Okay? So one thing it's used for is that's the default place where new content will go. The other thing it's used for is it's used as a template for permissions when you create other projects. Okay? So our suggestion is that you immediately go into that default project and you set the permissions to none for the all users group. And what that does is it means that by default, nobody is able to see or do anything in that default project. Okay? So now when you go create a new project, by default, nobody gets to see anything in there. And you have to explicitly go add permissions for groups of people to see content in there. This is a good habit because it means that you're thinking through explicitly who should be able to see what. It also means that if you're creating a project for particularly sensitive content, it's not a race where you have to go then lock it down before anybody can see stuff in there. Instead, you get to go add permissions to let people in. Okay, so this is the secure way to do this, and it will help you feel more sane and confident in do you know who can see what, okay? The next thing is use groups as a way to manage users for permissions, okay? So think about your common use cases and create a group for that, and that way, when a new user comes on board, you can say, hey, let's add them to this group and this group, but not that group, okay? The next thing is create projects. And again, those projects, you can think of them as use cases like, oh, okay, I'm going to have a bunch of people who need to be able to see content here in a different project for this kind of content, okay? And then when you, and so number 4 is exactly what I've been saying, which is do permissions from groups to projects. Okay, so I feel like I've hammered that home.
Yeah, drive that message home, exactly.
But let's see.
Yeah, let's put this into action and see what we can determine from just 3 very quick scenarios that we can run through. And it gets a bit interactive with you guys, so we can have a bit of fun with it. Do you want to do the first one?
Yeah, so the ask actually is get to know your neighbor, okay? So talk with your neighbor about the scenario and see if you come to the same answer, okay? So first scenario. So Darth Vader. We hired Darth Vader. He's a viewer, okay? That's his site role. And he is a member of a group that has edit permissions on some content. The question is, can Darth Vader edit the content? Oh, I hear some consensus potentially. Yeah? Okay, everybody raise your hands who think that he can edit the content. He's a member of a group that has permissions to do it. Okay, we have some. Okay, who thinks he cannot? Okay, let's see.
I might have ruined that surprise with the previous, but it needed to be said, I think.
Yeah, okay, so no, he cannot edit the content. Now, Kieran, I think that you had a comment on this.
Yeah, so we were looking at this, well, I created this screenshot, and then Chris said to me, that looks like the wrong screenshot. And I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure I did it right. And I looked at it, and it says down there, Darth Vader has a publisher, saying he's a publisher. So surely he can do this. He's got a pretty significant role in the server. But it's worth pointing out that is, when you select that particular group up there, it's saying that he's part of that group, which is a publisher group. But his site role is lesser, okay? So that's the one that really gets checked. And you can tell straight away that when you highlight it, these are grayed out. It says, no, we can't assign this. This has already been done by something higher than the group level, okay? So it's worth pointing that out. Yeah, we gave him access. We ended up giving him access, and then we had to fire him. But he had his notice period, and we got to get him to do his work. But we didn't want him to download data. So, so check this one out. So he's leaving the business. We're firing him. But we want to restrict him from downloading and taking information away from the business. Okay, we've seen this before, and there's certain things that you can do. So how can we achieve this by adding, or can we achieve this by adding specific user permissions while also having still as a member of that group? Yeah. So who thinks I can do that and restrict it? Okay, who doesn't think so? There should be the other hands going up, but anyway. Yeah, so it's exactly that, right? So again, going back to the hierarchy of how these things work, user first, groups next. And we just need to go in and add the user and apply those specific restrictions. Does anybody have a better way of doing this? Could be unlicensed, but he said then he won't be able to access content. Yes, exactly. Yeah, project. So actually, sorry, not project, group. So you can have two group permissions, right? And remember, we check first for denied and then allowed. So if you create a group saying leaving the business and you continue to use that, you can add them to that group and then say, yeah, that'll be the first check in that decision tree that we had on screen.
And this is an example of thinking about common use cases and setting up groups to support that. So you're probably going to have other employees who you want to cut off download access to. So create a group. Put that permission on there, deny allowing them to do that. And then anytime a new user comes in, you don't have to rethink through what should the new permissions be. Okay? You can just add them to that group.
Cool. Do you want to do that last one?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so Obi-Wan Kenobi has just started, and he has the site role of Explorer, but he hasn't been added to any groups yet. So we've done the thing that we recommend. So is he going to be able to see any content? Is he going to be able to publish?
Who thinks he can publish? Okay, cool. I think we're getting the message across. Yeah, yes. No, absolutely. So he's not able to publish. Basically, when he goes to Tableau Server, he sees nothing. He can log in because he's got a site role, he's got credentials, but he's going to see nothing. When he tries to publish from Tableau Desktop, he's just not going to be able to get that dialog box to pop up. So yeah, someone's potentially waiting to assign him to the correct group. And that might be the server admin adds the user and the site admin determines what group he goes into. Something like that.
All right.
Cool. Okay, so we're going on to our final topic, which is data security. There's an aspect of this which is going to be a demo, which we'll go through and just show you how to achieve this. But before I do so, I just want to cover the topic of, when we talk about data security, and actually there's a session in this room, I think an hour or two afterwards, which is talking about this with Tableau Desktop. But we'll recommend some sessions as well to guide you towards the right session. But this is row-level security. So I want to protect my data set. I want to say that user should only see this, and that user should only see this, and try to build that into my model in a secure way. So there's multiple approaches to this. We can do this by implementing it on the database. So if any of you guys have SQL Server and maybe your Active Directory and your domains connected correctly and you've got policies defined, that policy can be inherited by Tableau Server, and you can take that policy and apply it as a filter to every query that they execute against SQL Server. Okay? Leverage what you already have in existence. Don't go reinvent the wheel. And if you don't have something like that, and you want to start off from fresh, and you want to really lock down your dashboards and your data sources, you can do that in Tableau. And there's multiple ways to do that. Okay? We can do it using user filters. We can take a security table. We'll show you both those examples now in a moment. And there's one final one, which is just the privileges in the database role. So if you're using the database role as opposed to, if you think about SQL Server, we might give out database roles as opposed to Active Directory credentials and policies being defined. Just another option.
Specifically, the credentials that you hand to somebody that they use to log into a given database, that may let them only see a subset of the data in the database. Okay? And so you do want to aim for security in depth here, right? So we've got users and groups and permissions on Tableau Server, but then you can further enforce things by doing permissions in the database itself, so that even if something goes wrong at one layer, you still get protection at this other layer.
Exactly. Perfect. And because we mentioned the Windows example, the Microsoft SQL example It's just showing you the dialog box if you haven't seen it before. You can choose your Windows authentication, which will just inherit your current Active Directory login to your laptop or your machine, or you can specify that database user as well. Okay, so these are just very quickly the authentication modes that you can have when you're actually publishing this content to Tableau Server. You can have the workbook prompt the user for some credentials. You can also embed the details. If it's going to be that database user and it's going to be Tableau Server, so every single query coming from Tableau Server is Tableau Server. You can embed those credentials. With Windows, you have the concept of the run as user account. So I'm running this, by default, it used to be empty authority, but now it's whatever user you install with at that runtime. You can change it if you want. But that could be the account that takes the authorization on the SQL side. And then there's a few other options here. So viewer credentials with some different scenarios there. But I'm conscious of time, and I want to get in very quickly to the demo. So I'm going to jump in and show you the Tableau user filters. Okay. So you can see. Okay, so that's my awesome Tableau Server environment. Very quickly to show you, I have users that exist in here. So Anna, Cassandra, Chuck, and Kelly. And what I'm going to do is, they exist, I'm going to map them to certain regions so that when they approach dashboards, they're going to filter just to their specific region that they're associated with. This is my dashboard. You might be familiar with this. This is from the Tableau samples default project that gets created for you on Tableau Server. But the easiest way to get started is to jump into a worksheet. You can't do it from a dashboard. So jump into a worksheet, come up to server, and create user filter. Okay? And I can choose the dimension that I want to assign or map users to. Okay, so I'll just get out of this view. And I will choose my region. Okay? So I'll select region. I get a dialog box. The dialog box shows me the values, the different values, the discrete values for region, and the users that exist on my server. And I am simply going to assign Anna to central, Cassandra to east, Chuck to south, and Kelly to west. And I'm the admin, so I need to see everything. So I'm going to assign myself to all. I can call this user filter. Creating that alone doesn't apply the filter. Okay, it's actually creating a set down here. It's creating a set for me. And I can use that set to check if members are in or out. And the easiest way to do it, or the easiest way to test it from here, is to just drag this and bring it up to my filters pane. Okay? So my user filters on my filters pane. And if you're not aware, you've got this user context view down in the bottom right. So I can change the user context to see what some user might be able to see. So I can see everything, I'm the admin. But what if I change this to Anna or to Chuck? Change it to Anna, it filters for me. Now, I've got Tableau Server up and running for a while. I'm giving my end users web edit capabilities. I actually don't want this filter to be on the worksheet level. I want it to be locked down and not removable. So what I'd rather like to do is take this one away for the moment, and actually apply the very same set, the user filter, to my data source filters. Because I'm not going to give anyone access to change my data sources. So I'll edit the data source filter here. And an option or user filter, you might ask why I did the underscore. It was just to make sure it came to the top. But you got your user filter there. So I can apply it to the data source. So every single workbook that's created off of that data source will impose this security measure. So I'll double click this. In this case, I want to use all. Hit OK. And now it filters. And that isn't removable on the workbook level by the end user. I can simply just say, that's it, that's your data source, have at it. You're only going to see what you're supposed to see based on how I defined it. I'll change to Cassandra to show her region, northeast. But that's not the only way to do it. So the final thing that I want to show you on this one is actually a table. So I might, in my database, define a table and create that mapping so that it's not driven by Tableau Server, but it's actually going to be driven by the model that I create for my data source. First thing I got to do is replace my data source filter. So get rid of this again. Remove that one. And in this case, I'll jump in and I've got my people's table added here. So Cassandra, Anna, Chuck, they all exist in my people's table. And that's been joined on the region field. Okay, so can I leverage this? This could be my security table. This could be my mapping to say who can see what. Now, as part of calculated fields, I can pull out the detail. So I'll call this one my table security. And I can pull out the user. So first of all, I want to say person is the field from that rightmost data source that we just saw. And I can say person equals username. And if I just get this one to be a little bit, this is going to create a Boolean result, true or false. Does the person equal the right person? So username is automatically going to pull in the user context, the person viewing the content. I can hit apply. And just like I did with the previous example, I can leverage that, or I can apply this Tableau security field to my data source filter. So there it is there, just above my user filter that I created. And I want to say true. And now I'm driving the security, the row-level security of this particular workbook and any workbook created from this data source through my securities table. So you might want to define that separately. You want to pass that responsibility on to someone else. So that's kind of the way that we would recommend and see other customers approaching it. Cool. Okay, so just jumping back into the slide deck. So we just want to go over the session recap. So what exactly we covered. And we don't want to get into too much detail because we've already spoken about it and we're running towards the end of the session. But just the authentication, so that's what we've discussed in very brief detail. We went into authorization, especially describing the differences between both of those. And we also just showed you and spoke about data security for a moment. Okay. Now, we scraped the surface. We appreciate that, and we know that there's a lot of things that you would have already known from this session, but hopefully there was something in there that you can take away and apply. But we want to just draw your attention to some related sessions that will go into further detail if there's something specific that you want to know. Tableau Server security in depth. This will be talking about mostly the security model, talking about encryption if you're interested in that, and how we secure communication.
Yeah, and so this session is aimed towards people who want to do an installation of Tableau Server and understand how to harden that installation, okay? So this talk will not be getting into permissions and the things that we talked about in this. It's actually a different session, and it's worth going to if you are in charge of administering a server.
Yeah. The next one is actually focusing on embedded analytics. So data security in an embedded analytics scenario. And yeah, it's to mask potentially identifiable information that you might want to aggregate and compare yourself against. So that's something that could be interesting for you if you're looking at an embedded scenario. You've got a peer-to-peer A/B comparison that you might want to do. And finally is the data level security with Tableau Desktop. That's actually in this room next, not immediately afterwards, but sometime afterwards. Oh, sorry. Didn't press that one right. And that is, again, something that could be really beneficial to you, and it's again in this room. Finally, before we let you go, we would love to hear from you. Sorry, do you want to go back to that slide? Yeah, sorry, I saw some people taking photos. So while they're taking photos there, there is the survey on the app for the conference. And we would really appreciate you guys giving your honest and candid feedback on our presentation skills, on the content, on the way we dress, whatever it might be. And we would really appreciate honest feedback because the feedback you give us makes our jobs easier to prepare for next conference, makes it better for you next conference, not just for this session, for all sessions. We might not deliver this next year, we might do something different. Right. Who knows? But please do get on that and give us feedback. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to present to you all, you guys. We'll take questions now. Yeah.
So, in a typical
So the question is asking about rogue administrators. And rogue administrators are an interesting question. And which administration role are we talking about? Site admin, server admin, or like system admin, right? So server admin is the person who has the ability to add and remove sites and also designate site admins and other server admins, right? And so if you have a malicious server admin, you have a problem, right? You have a problem because that malicious server admin is able to do backups and then do what they will with those backups. So at a minimum, all of the content that is published to the server is at risk. Okay, so that is a high privileged user, and you need to be thoughtful about who gets that. I think the question is about how can we partition the privileges such that they're able to administer users but not administer the data. So I'm actually on the product security team, and it's my job to think about how to break features. And so if I have access to the physical machine and I have access to being able to create new users and assign them permissions, then I get to own the system. So, I mean, that's the honest truth. So for purposes of your question, I think that you really want to have good monitoring in place so that at a minimum, if somebody is doing something bad, then you have evidence that it happened and you can find out about it soon and then try to minimize the disruption to your system. Okay. Here in the front. Yeah. Yes? Mm-hmm. So the question is, do the data filters work on extracts? So Kieran was demonstrating data filters within a data source. And so yes, it works independent of what kind of data source that is. So that data source could be backed by a live connection to a relational database or to an extract or to any number of things. And so yes, those are filters that are built into the data source. It doesn't matter what kind it is. Okay, so the question is, there appears to be buggy behavior around that when going from a live connection to an extract, and I don't have an answer for you. So it sounds potentially interesting. So, okay, here in the front. Yeah.
So we already have Active Directory authentication in place.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what should we do so that, let's say, user comes, he logs in, closes the browser, but then again he wants to start the session, he doesn't have to enter the username and password.
Okay, so the question is, we're using Active Directory for authentication, and a user comes and, so they log in once they log out?
No, he doesn't log out, he just closes the browser.
He closes the browser, okay.
And then again, same 10 minutes again, he starts.
And then he opens the browser and
then it forces him to enter the username password.
right, and so then the user is forced to re-authenticate because they closed the browser. But the session timeout configuration on the server is longer than the 10 minutes, right? So the real question is there something going on in the browser that made the cookie get cleared out? Because the way that the browser tells the server who this user is via a cookie. It's called the session cookie, okay? So once you authenticate, you get a session, and if you're able to provide that session cookie, then you get to continue being that user. And if you lose it, then you don't, okay? So it may have to do with browser settings, or potentially, so I don't have a solid answer to your question. I can say that single sign-on would help relieve pain there, because that single sign-on session is maintained independently of the session to Tableau Server. And so,
Right. I mean, that's what SSO is, but you don't get that experience. If you try playing with different settings.
So if you're doing Active Directory authentication, that means that the credentials are going through Tableau Server, and Active Directory's role is simply to validate that those credentials map to a particular user, but the session is purely maintained through Tableau Server. But in the single sign-on scenario, there's an independent session with the single sign-on system, and that's what allows re-signing into Tableau Server to be painless. So my suggestion would be to look at using SAML or some other kind of single sign-on approach. So, okay. Yes? Does data security affect calculations? Yes. Fixed calculations. Right, so the question is, how does filtering affect aggregate calculations that are drawn from all the rows, right? And I think the answer is it depends, right? So the lower level your filter is, the more restricted on, so if, for example, they were using database credentials that only have access to a subset of the rows, then any aggregation calculations will only be based on those rows, okay? And I think that if you do that same kind of filter at the data source level, you'll have the same effect. If you do it at the workbook level, it becomes questionable. So I can't give you a hard yes or no. Yes, on the wall? So the question is data blending versus cross-database join, and a recommendation on security relative to between the two. Is that right? So Kieran is going to have some opinions on this. I remember when I first started working with data blending, and I found it frustrating at times because what I actually wanted to do is be able to do row-level cross-database joins. So now that that's a feature, the only reason I would not use it is for performance reasons, if for some reason I can't get the performance I need. And that's going to depend on whatever the specific queries are that I'm trying to do. So from a security perspective, there's probably some gotchas in there because now you're doing cross-data source joins. And it's possible that you aren't in sync on the filters that are in place on one versus on the other. So that can bite you. So from a performance perspective, I think you will find that cross-database joins are going to be slower just because of the nature of the queries. Yeah. So, okay. So I will stick around after the talk, so I will try to get to all of your questions there. So the question is about the site roles for users and what the implications are. And so we do have public-facing documentation on our website that goes into all the gory details of that. So, you know, viewer versus explorer versus creator, and oh, you're talking about the permissions page, right? Where you can expand it out and you can see the effect for a given user. Yeah, so we do have we have documentation on the website that does go into permissions in detail. So yes. Yes?
So on the data filters where you apply the table join to the people table, some of my data sets are HIPAA related. Does that expose the people listed there? Can they go there and impersonate a different user if they have access to it through the data sources?
So I want to be very careful answering your question because it's a HIPAA-related question. So, yeah, so the question had to do with, and I'm going to get this wrong, which is why I'm nervous about this one. So in a HIPAA scenario, right, where there's very hard requirements on who can see what, can you repeat the question, actually?
So if you expose the people table to the user, the data source gives you for a data filter for row-level security, can they see the table, and then subsequently can they impersonate a separate user within that list if they can see the user list?
Oh, okay. So the question is, if a given user is able to see the list of users in that site, right, are they then able to impersonate that user such that they can see data that they should not? That's the question? Yeah. So as you saw, Kieran was able to go and impersonate different users to see the effect of that filter. But Kieran had access to all of the data because of the credentials he was able to supply. Okay, so presumably, Kieran was entitled to see all of that information. But a random user cannot impersonate another random user because, because we designed it to not do that, right? Intentionally, right? So knowing the existence of a user doesn't give you access to their credentials so that you can impersonate them, okay? Now, in the case where I go and I publish a data source to Tableau Server, I have the option of embedding my credentials, right? Such that other people who have access to view my workbook now get to see the data that my credentials have access to, okay? And so any kind of filters that I'm putting on the data source are an attempt to narrow what other users get to see using my database credentials, okay? So there's a question over here. Yeah. So the question is about sub-projects or child projects beneath a top-level project. And so those are useful currently for organizing content, okay? But they don't have the same permissions properties that we talked about in this talk. So we intentionally chopped them from the talk because we were trying to focus on best habits for groups and projects and managing permissions using those. So when you do sub-projects, you don't have the same flexibility, okay? So I would hope that that's on our roadmap to enhance the permissions functionality around sub-projects, but I can't promise anything today. So the question, which I fully expect, is so when are you going to make permissions better on sub-projects? And I cannot tell you when, so. Right, and so you end up with many, many top-level projects so that you can tailor the permissions for each one, and boy, wouldn't it be nice if you could have sub-projects that allowed, and so that you could actually control the permissions on each of those sub-projects, and I wholeheartedly agree, and Kieran has told me stories about customers where they have many projects because they're generating them using the REST API. So, yes. You're welcome.
We have the username filter set up on all of our worksheets in education, so we need to filter down your different levels of security for administrators, teachers, classroom levels.
Okay.
The problem is that filter tends to affect performance so much to the point where a lot of our teachers and school leaders don't use Tableau. And we're trying to look for workarounds or ways that could change that thing because we have approximately 3,000 to 5,000
Sure.
people, and so it's running that filter.
Sure.
And it's way too big to sell.
Right. So the question is, they're using user filters within the workbook to filter down the data that's visible to different groups of users, but it has performance impact. And what can they do about it? So I would suggest that, so performance issues, you can absolutely run into performance issues with filters and all kinds of other things just because, but the question is, where is the time being spent, okay? So I would suggest you actually do a drop-in Tableau Doctor session, or hopefully you've booked one already. They may be full, but you may be able to get a drop-in session because it's important to understand where in the flow that filter is being applied and where the processing time is being spent, okay? So typically speaking, the earlier in the pipeline you can have the filter being applied, the better performance you're going to get. So if you could do the filtering within the database, right, and ensure that you have the correct indexes in place on your database, then you're dragging less data back from the database to be filtered out in Tableau. So there is no single canned answer to this. It's a big, it depends. So in the red?
I might have missed this earlier, but the ability to add members, so users to a group, it's not an active directory. Maybe I don't want to do it on a database basis for whatever reason. Can I file add multiple users to a group in one?
So the question has to do with managing user membership in groups, and the groups in Active Directory don't seem to be reflected in Tableau Server. And
Let's just say they don't. You need to create a group.
right.
But there's multiple users in that group. I know we can pick and choose.
You can pick and choose. I believe you can do it using the, you can do it with the CSV file, I believe. So I don't trust myself on this particular thing, but yes, there are ways to do this. I mean, the big hammer approach would be to do it using the REST API programmatically, but you have to write code at that point. Okay. It's possible that you can do it with the CSV file, but Kieran may tell me that I'm lying to you. So, yes?
For separate development versus test versus production environment, what is the best practice? To have them in separate sites or separate projects?
Okay, so the question is about the having a development space and a staging space and a production space, and how do you, do I have any best practices to recommend around how to develop content and then not have it be visible to everybody until it's ready? So it depends. It depends on how hard a requirement is that people not see it, right? So you may find that projects are exactly what you want, right? Because that way you can move content from one project to another without having to republish. If it's a very hard requirement, so for example, it's on the level of you're going to violate SEC rules, if somebody sees it early, I would recommend sites, because that's going to give you the most assurance that no one can see it, okay? So, yeah, there's many ways to do this. So, yes? Is there a limit to the number of groups that you can have? There's probably a practical limit. I wonder how, I suspect it has to do with how well provisioned your hardware is, okay? So I'm not sure what our current load test numbers are with regard to that, so. Can you have 2,000 groups? So I don't think the server will care. The UI may get a little funky in some places. So, but we do intentionally go create obscene numbers of things in server just to, get well past what our customers would plausibly do. So, yes?
You mentioned trusted authentication as a way of embedding in, into a web portal.
Mm-hmm.
I also saw something about a guest user account. Is there any scenarios where you say, oh, just use a guest user? Or?
So yeah, so guest user is something that you can optionally purchase as part of a core license, I believe. And you can accomplish, well, it depends. So guest user, right? Guest user I would use when truly I want anybody to be able, that can reach the server to be able to see that content, okay? The trusted authentication path means that I'm delegating off to this other system who gets to see what, okay? And so they're really not the same thing. Trusted authentication is a much more flexible thing because now I can trust my code over here to determine who gets to see what, okay? Whereas guest is anybody, right? So, yeah. All right, any more questions? Okay, yes? I'm sorry? So the slides will all be available, and I'm not sure exactly how that will be announced, but I think all attendees will have access to all the slides, including these. Okay, so thank you very much for all attending. I appreciate it.